Hello, I'm Tom Teicher. We Americans, together, as a people, need something to look forward to. Something that would be meaningful, something that might even unite us. How about an amendment to the United States Constitution that calls for reviewing the Constitution through a set of fresh eyes? How about an amendment that doesn't merely make possible, but requires a constitutional convention on a regular basis? As a starting point, let us agree that we are not happy with the state of our democracy. Just in recent times, several issues have gained prominence, such as a Congress that is paralyzed, a judiciary that is politicized, and a public that is polarized. Much of our dissatisfaction stems from the very foundation of our democracy, the U.S. Constitution. No doubt it is a remarkable document that has kept this country going for a long time, but it is also a very imperfect document. One of its flaws is that it is resistant to change. Both methods the Constitution lays out as ways of amending it make this task extremely difficult. So while more than 11,000 amendments have been proposed, only 27 have successfully made their way into the Constitution, including the 10 comprising the Bill of Rights. And the Constitution as a whole has never been subjected to a reassessment. The result is we have allowed our system of government to stagnate. It's been almost 240 years since the Constitution was written. Since then, what lessons has our history taught us? What can we learn from the experiences of other countries? And let's face it, life does not stand still. Our circumstances change, and our possibilities change, and sometimes so do our values. So while the Constitution in many respects may remain praiseworthy, what is also clear is the need for a periodic review. A deliberate process, a chance to contemplate and fine-tune this framework of our democracy. That is what a constitutional convention scheduled on a regular basis would achieve. The vehicle for putting this on the calendar would be a 28th Amendment. A convention would provide a chance to ask, in what ways has the Constitution in its present form served us well and should remain as is? It is also a chance to ask, in what ways has it proven to be unclear, or inadequate, or ineffective, or unfair, or short-sighted, and what changes should follow. This is partly about how our federal government is designed, its relationship with the states, and who is empowered to do this or that. It is partly about the practice of our democracy, from the election of public officials to the bounds of political speech. And it's about what we stand for as a people. What rights and obligations should come with being an American? How should the Constitution deal with important values like freedom, security, privacy, community, and opportunity, all of which mean different things to different people in different settings? More broadly, can the Constitution guide us and our institutions toward striking a reasonable balance between our current desires and what we owe future generations? That's a lot to chew on. So, how should a constitutional convention be organized and outlined in a 28th Amendment? First, a critical question. Should there be limitations placed on the convention's subject matter? I think the answer is no. Do not tie the hands of the convention's delegates out of concerns about a so-called runaway convention. Let them do their job. If the process for making changes to the Constitution is a good process, it will lead to good results. I think that process starts with an important principle. That principle is impartiality. No favorites. Americans will not and should not buy into the idea of a convention if the field is tilted and the rules are either biased in favor of the status quo or any particular changes to the Constitution. For example, no current public officials should be able to serve as convention delegates. They would certainly have a stake in protecting their prerogatives. Along the same lines, the convention should be structured in a way that it makes no difference which political party is in power at the time it takes place. So, how do we proceed? Well, there are three tasks at hand. One is the creation of the delegations to the convention. The second is the development of proposals by these delegations to amend the Constitution. And the third is the ratification of the proposals. Let's start with the creation of delegations to the convention. As a starting point, let's call for each state and the District of Columbia to be represented by 3 delegates. This would produce 51 times 3, a total of 153 delegates. While one could argue in favor of more delegates, this is a manageable number in terms of providing each delegate a sufficient opportunity to actively engage in the convention's debates. And it's a substantially larger number than the 55 who were able to create the Constitution in the Convention of 1787. At that time, each state's delegates were chosen by their respective state legislatures. That works, up to a point. It brings the process close to the people, but still leaves us with the issue of partisanship. How do we remove, or at least minimize, the role of politics at this stage when the fact is that legislatures are political entities? How would each state's 3 delegates be chosen? For the first 2, I suggest that each one of a state's 2 legislative bodies gets to select a single delegate. That means 1 delegate is chosen by each chamber, except in Nebraska and Washington, D.C., where there is a one-body legislature that would select both. What is critical, however, is that the selection of each delegate would require an 80% supermajority. Now, supermajorities are somewhat out of favor these days due to their association with the Senate filibuster. They're viewed by many people as an unnecessary obstacle to getting things done. But when thinking about the way the convention is organized, we should be asking ourselves whether it will likely lead to a constitution a significant portion of the American people can support and feel invested in. That's where a supermajority comes into play. But why 80%? That's a pretty high bar. Well, meeting an 80% threshold virtually ensures that for at least 2/3 of the states, at least one of the 2 delegates chosen by the state legislature would need to receive the support of both Democratic and Republican legislators. That's a lot to digest, but here's the point. For the vast majority of states, the selection of at least one of the 2 convention delegates chosen by the legislature will require a compromise between legislators who are relatively conservative and those who are relatively liberal. The political leanings of the delegates will take a back seat to a search for widely respected individuals, be they political actors or recruits from other fields. And what about the 3rd delegate? Well, those first 2 delegates will choose that delegate. This will ensure philosophical accommodations within the great majority of delegations. The selection of that 3rd person will also provide an opportunity for the first 2 delegates to identify someone who can offer a different perspective that also reflects that state's population and circumstances. Let's move on to the development of proposals to amend the Constitution. At the 1787 convention, each proposal under consideration by the convention required approval by a majority of those delegations. And that continues to make sense. But we need to add a couple of wrinkles. In Article 5 of our current Constitution, the U.S. Congress is the body that can propose new amendments with 2/3 support from both the House and Senate. So Congress will have to give its blessing to our 28th Amendment. Understandably, it will want its own role to play. Well, how do we do this without violating our impartiality guideline, since the workings of Congress are so prone to partisanship? Let's do the following. Once the convention has passed its set of proposals, let's give Congress a period of time to offer changes to those ideas through a 2/3 vote in both the House and Senate. If Congress does offer any changes, the convention would then get to reconvene. It would have a certain time frame in which it could either accept Congress's changes, or revise them, or it could restore its own version. But if the convention does anything other than accept Congress's changes, it will have a higher bar to clear than before, requiring the support of 2/3 of its delegations, not merely a majority. The final step is ratification. The 1787 convention required 9 of the 13 states to approve the Constitution through special ratifying conventions. The Constitution itself requires approval by 3/4 of the states through action by the legislatures or special conventions. But I think there's a better way, and that's by letting the American people decide directly. A ratification vote of the revised Constitution by a simple majority of the American people might be more a symbolic statement than the product of an in-the-weeds analysis by the typical voter. But it would represent a fair affirmation that the final product is substantially in line with the views of the electorate. It would also serve as a critical one-person, one-vote complement to the state-based process for proposing the constitutional changes. Finally, how often should we go through this exercise? Thomas Jefferson famously suggested a constitution should lapse and be rewritten every 19 years, corresponding to a change in generations. But it is likely a revised constitution, especially if there were to be extensive revisions, would need more time than that to demonstrate its strengths and weaknesses, to earn the public's trust, and to avoid being viewed as an interim measure rather than a document of enduring merit. So I'd suggest the convention be held every 40 years. You know, there's nothing radical about any of this. It's the way we make decisions in life. Once in a while, we take stock of where we're at, and we make mid-course corrections. Sometimes these are just minor tweaks, and sometimes an overhaul is necessary. Just as a thought experiment, if we were writing the Constitution from scratch, is the one we now have in place the one you would want? I think it's pretty clear the answer is no, each of us having our own reasons. And that's not to minimize how well the current Constitution, in many respects, has served us over the years. But it had shortcomings that were evident right out of the gate. And as time has passed, more questions have been raised. And you wouldn't expect otherwise. To be clear, no constitutional convention will produce a document without some provisions that concern some of us as being less than ideal. It might even close the door on certain laws or policies some of us favor. But that's a chance I'm willing to take, and I hope you are too. Perfection is not our goal here. If the convention, through its articulation of bold principles and delicate compromises, can create an updated constitution that in its entirety the vast majority of Americans can stand behind, that will represent meaningful progress for our country. That will advance us to a better place, giving us a stronger foundation for the next 40 years, and on, ensuring our democracy progresses vigorously with the changing times. And all the while, as this process contributes to a more common vision among the American people, it might also help restore mutual trust and return some civility to our public discourse. These would be no small achievements. Passage of a 28th Amendment would begin with a 2/3 vote of support in both the U.S. Senate and House of Representatives. It is a daunting hurdle, but not an insurmountable one. If you'd like to help make it happen, let your senators and House member know you support this idea at congress.gov/contact-us. Thank you for your time and attention.